All the Young Dudes by MsKingBean89. Chapter 107. 6th Year. Negotiations. Sunday 15th January 1977. He slept as late as possible the next morning to put off further confrontation. He couldn't talk to them. Not yet. Not until his head was straight. They'd have so many questions. Some he couldn't answer. Some he didn't want to. He showered for longer than usual. Something of Olivia seemed to cling to him, and he turned the tap right up, trying to scold it off. The claw marks she had left were healing already, but still itched under Remus's scratchy wool jumper. Washed and dressed, Remus went to his trunk and looked for a spare bit of parchment before scrawling an untidy note. "If you're still in the village, I'd like to talk to you again." He folded it in a hurry, shoved it in his pocket, and headed for the owlery. The marauders were all in the common room, in much the same state as they had been the night before. Remus looked at them, panicked, then bent his head and kept walking. "Mooney, wait!" They followed him, all three, through the portrait hole. No matter, they couldn't discuss it in the open. He knew this, and they knew it. "I'm going to the owlery," he said, marching ahead. "Don't you want breakfast?" Peter asked. "After." "Mooney, can we talk about what happened last night?" James asked, sounding very tired still. Remus supposed he'd been bearing the brunt of Sirius's frustration. "Good. Let someone else do that for a bit." "Not here." Unfortunately, they all followed him to the owlery, which happened to be completely empty, except for owls, of course, most of which were sleeping. "Who are you writing to?" Sirius asked at once. Remus closed his eyes, sighed, and resumed tying his note to the nearest owl. "Ferox, my old professor." "Why?" Remus dropped the string he was using and tottered as he had to bend to pick it up. He continued to explain, calmly. "He's an Hogsmaid. I saw him last night, but I want to see him again." "What was he doing in—" Remus tottered again, fumbling with his third attempt to tie the note to the agitated owl's leg. Sirius was standing much too close, leaning over him, demanding answers, and Remus could barely concentrate. "He's working with Moody, and he got summoned there to bring me back." "Summoned by who?" "Fucking hell, give me a minute, will ya?" Remus snapped. Sirius stood back, looking as if he'd very much like to say something else, but was biting his tongue. James touched his shoulder again. Remus ignored them both and tied the letter to the bird, maybe a bit too tight, because it pecked him angrily before flying off down towards the village. He could stay there, maybe. It might not take long. But his stomach growled. He turned to look at his friends. "Okay, breakfast?" "Are you going to tell—" "Yes, Padfoot, fine. Let's, get some toast and go for a walk or something, okay?" So that's what they did. Remus buttered at least 5 slices of toast in the Great Hall, wrapped them in napkins, and stuffed them into the pockets of his robes. The other 3 marauders followed him, watching cautiously, as if they weren't quite sure what to make of him yet. "Right," he said, once they were outside. "You all need to shut up and let me tell it to you, okay? No interruptions." They nodded solemnly as they walked. He saw Sirius purse his lips. Tough, Remus thought, spitefully. You can listen to me for once. So, he talked. He found it much easier than telling Dumbledore. At least he knew for sure the marauders were on his side. He tried to explain everything with as little emotional context as possible. He'd known there was a werewolf nearby. He went to find them. He met Livia. Ferox intervened. "Moody talked to me last summer," he explained, finally. "He said something to me, and it just made me think about how useful I can be, that's all. I have to stop looking at my furry little problem as a problem. If we're going to war with dark creatures, then as a dark creature I ought to be—" "You're not a dark creature," James said, suddenly. "You're our Mooney." Remus shrugged. He wouldn't have put money on James being the first to interrupt, but now he was pretty glad he had. He left a pause. There was nothing more to tell. James was still looking at him, with a small crease between his eyebrows. He pushed his glasses up his nose, clearly thinking very deeply. Peter, of course, looked anxious. He was staring at his feet, rubbing his hands together. Remus didn't look at Sirius. He looked for his fags instead. So, James said, after swallowing, she's gone now, has she? The werewolf. Livia, Remus said, cigarette between his teeth. Yeah, I think Ferric scared her off. Too bloody right, James nodded. Much more comfortable talking action. And I bet with Moody on the case, she won't be back anytime soon, eh? So, are you in a lot of trouble with Dumbledore? I don't think so, Remus sighed. He rubbed his sore hip. I think Dumbledore's more worried about me mucking up his sparring rather than breaking any rules. He wouldn't want to see you hurt. Any of us, James said, sincerely. He eyed Remus's awkward posture. Come on, there's a bench down here. You can finish your toast. They made slow progress down towards the edge of the lake, where there were a few stone benches. It was too cold for anyone else to be out at this time on a Sunday, and Remus watched the late morning mist drift across the dark surface of the water as he chewed on the remains of his crusts. Sirius hadn't spoken yet, since the owlry, and Remus was trying not to notice. Sirius felt betrayed. Remus knew that as sure as he knew his own name. Betrayed, even if he didn't really have the right to feel it. This isn't about you, Remus wanted to hiss at doleful, silent Sirius. Can't believe we all slept through the most exciting night of the year, eh? James nudged Remus, trying to bring a bit of levity to the otherwise rather sombre atmosphere. It wasn't that exciting, Remus grinned back, giving him what he wanted. I was crap. If Ferrix hadn't come, I don't know. Do you think she could have disapparated with you? Peter asked, still wringing his pudgy little hands. I don't know, Remus replied. I got the impression, anyway, that she needed me to agree. Like it had to be me who made the decision. Otherwise, I suppose they could all just gang up and snatch me. Well then, James repeated, satisfied. Remus looked at his hands, still greasy from the toast. He wiped them on his trouser legs. Of course not. Of course he would never. Except... Mooney, James said, sensing the odd quiet. I'd never join him, Remus said, carefully. And Livia she was awful, but, he breathed in. Not everything she said was wrong. What's that supposed to mean? Sirius burst out. Remus still didn't look at him, growing hot. Just that, well, wizards treat us unfairly and, oh, you lot wouldn't understand. Sirius sprang up, as if he had been wound up to breaking point. He glared at Remus as if he was about to start screaming at him. Then he walked away at an impossible pace. Black! James stood up. Oi! It's fine, Remus waved a hand. Sorry, I shouldn't have said anything. I can't explain properly. He's been such a moody git lately, James huffed, still watching the other boy storm away. Go after him if you want, Remus said. Honestly, you're the best at sorting him out when he's like that. Me and Wormy will find you later, yeah? Okay, James said, already moving. Thanks, Mooney. Those two are so weird sometimes, Peter said, watching James catch up. I swear, I never know what anyone's on about anymore. It's all war this and war that. Yeah, it's a bit of a pain, innit? Remus replied. He had meant it sarcastically, but poor Peter had never been very quick on that uptake. Yeah, you know what I mean, don't you, Mooney? I just think, we're only 16. Can't we think about something other than doing the right thing all the time? We used to have fun. Remus was only half listening. He stretched, rubbing his hip again to see if it would move for him. Think I might go back to bed, Pete, or the library. Why don't you go and see Desi? What? You didn't know? Peter stared at him, incredulously, as he helped Remus to his feet. Know what? Remus asked, arching his back again for good measure. She dumped me. Oh, shit, Remus blinked. Sorry, mate. Was that last night too? Last week, Peter said, with an uncharacteristic coldness in his voice. Sorry, Remus said again, embarrassed. He didn't think he had actually spoken to Peter about anything much in weeks. He'd been so wrapped up in Sirius and the wolf pack and Sirius and Christopher. He resolved to do much better with all of his friends. After all, as soon as he turned 17, they would be all he had. "I'm really sorry, Wormtail," he said, kindly. "Want to play chess instead, then?" Monday, 16th January 1977. Remus was genuinely sorry to hear about Peter and Desi. She'd never really been part of their group, but she was a nice enough girl and had made Peter happy. She had given him something that James and Sirius did not have, and that was special in itself. The breakup had ostensibly been simply down to a change in attitudes. They had been seeing each other since they were 14, and at 16, it seemed that Desdemona wished to spread her wings a bit. "She might change her mind," Remus suggested to a glum-faced Peter over their third chess game. "Doubt it," Peter roughed. "Reckon she's got a crush on that Roman Rotherhide bloke. Wanker. Knight's at F3. I thought Mary was seeing him." "Mary sees everyone," Peter snickered, meanly. "She's like the girl version of Padfoot." Ferrex's reply arrived later that Sunday evening. "Remus, I'm afraid I can't invite you to Hogsmeade, but I can meet you for supper on Monday evening at the castle. I'll meet you outside the Great Hall at 6 p.m. That was okay. Good enough. He could ask what he needed to ask anywhere. Remus went to his lessons as usual on Monday and told the Marauders at lunchtime. Sirius was speaking to him again, but not properly. For every small step forward, he and Remus seemed to take 3 enormous steps back again. "I'm having tea with Ferrex tonight," he explained, "so I won't see you until later." He knew James had Quidditch practice, which Peter would be watching now that he had no girlfriend. Sirius sat up straighter. "Should we come too?" "Why?" Remus asked, fixing him with a cold stare. Sirius shrugged and looked back at his soup. By the time 6 o'clock rolled around, Remus was practically pacing the halls. He didn't want to look over-eager, so he'd waited at the top of the landing before going down the main staircase at just 1 minute past the hour. This turned out to be something of a mistake. By the time he got there, Mary had found Ferrex and struck up a conversation. "Remus," she grinned as he descended. "Look who's here." "It's Mr. Lupin I'm here to see," Ferrex smiled, easily, shaking Remus's hand. It all felt very grown up. "I'm trying to convince him to come back and teach us again," Mary explained, cheerfully. "We miss him, don't we, Remus?" Yeah, of course," Remus nodded. Mary smiled at him and touched his forearm, leaning into him in a very familiar sort of way. He couldn't remember if she'd ever done that before. "Can you wait here?" she asked Ferrex, still touching Remus. "Marlene'll be down in a minute. She'd love to see you." "I'm afraid we need to be getting on," Ferrex said, kindly. "Maybe another time, Miss MacDonald. Remus, shall we?" Remus followed Ferrex up the staircase, rather than towards the hall, leaving Mary at the bottom. "Thought we could do with a bit of privacy," Ferrex murmured. "Professor Kettleburn has kindly let me borrow my old office." Remus had only been in the Care of Magical Creatures office once since Ferrex had left, to request an extension on an essay after a full moon. Kettleburn was a Spartan sort of man who had chosen not to decorate at all, but who had stacks of paperwork strewn all over the place. Ferrex tidied this neatly away with a swish of his wand before summoning drinks and 2 plates for supper. The food appeared just as it did in the Great Hall. Ham, egg and chips tonight. "My favourite," Ferrex smiled, motioning that Remus begin eating. They tucked in quietly for a few minutes, and Remus enjoyed the novelty of sharing dinner with a friend rather than hundreds of other people. "So," he said, mopping up the last of his egg yolk with the chip, "I wanted to talk about Livia." "Look at you," Ferrex nodded at him. 2 years ago, I could barely get you to say 2 words to me about yourself." Remus shrugged. "No time to be shy anymore, I suppose. There's a war going on." "Don't I bloody know it," Ferrex sighed. "All right, go on, lad." "Okay," Remus took a deep breath. "I don't want to join her, them, greyback. I don't want to be a part of their pack or anything like that." Ferrex nodded, but said nothing. Remus, emboldened, continued. "But I think I could find them easily. I think they could find me, and they still want me. That's what Dumbledore wants, isn't it? A backdoor to the werewolves. I can do that. I know what I did was stupid, and I won't do it again, not while I'm at Hogwarts, not at least until I'm of age. But now I know her. Now I know what they're like. I'm not afraid, I can do it. I see. Has Dumbledore said... No, but I'm not stupid, Remus said, dismissively. He hasn't asked me to do anything, because he never asks. He just makes sure you know what he wants. But there are things that I want too. And what are those? I'm not signing the register on my birthday, Remus said, steadily. I'm not exposing myself to the Ministry. I've looked into it. If I do, I have to report to them for 3 days every month. They lock me up, I assume. It's not very clear from the information they put out. I can't keep a job like that. If Dumbledore needs a spy, then he needs me to be untraceable too. I see, Verix said again. But I'm not finished, Remus snapped. Afterwards, if we win, I want amnesty for the werewolves. Even Greyback's pack. Not Greyback, obviously, but his followers. Remus, that's completely... No, it isn't, Remus folded his arms. You don't know. Livia might be batshit, but she's not wrong. A choice between freedom under Greyback or imprisonment under the Ministry is an easy one to make. Ferrex looked at him for a very long time. Remus drank his pumpkin juice, his throat very dry. His heart was beating so fast he thought Ferrex might be able to hear it. These aren't necessarily things Dumbledore can do, Ferrex said, slowly. Bullshit, Remus set down his goblet, a little too hard on the desk. I can bring it to him, Ferrex sighed, sounding defeated, but I can't make promises. Well, Remus replied, coolly. I'm 17 in 2 months, so there's the deadline. Blimey, Ferrex scratched his head. He sounded impressed rather than angry. You don't half remind me of Lyle right now. What happened to the hot-headed kid always getting into scrapes? I'm still hot-headed, Remus said, simply. I think Lyle probably was too. It's not that I think Dumbledore can solve all my problems, but I wanted to lay all my cards on the table. Fair enough, Ferrex nodded. All's fair in love and war, eh? I wouldn't know about that, Remus replied. Their plates vanished, suddenly, and then reappeared, bearing 2 big wedges of chocolate cake topped with fruit. They ate them quietly, both deep in thought, occasionally shooting looks at each other. How's it going with Moody? Remus asked, casually. I suppose you probably can't tell me anything. You suppose right, Ferrex nodded. Moody's well, though. Complete and utter, but glad he's on our side. And Achilles? Achilles is fine, Ferrex smiled. Staying with a friend of mine. Speaking of which, how long's the romance been going on there, Lupin? The what? Remus stared at him, wide-eyed. Ferrex laughed. With Miss MacDonald down there? I'd have matched you better with Marlene, but I suppose the art wants what it wants, eh? Oh, Remus relaxed. No, Mary's just a friend. Ferrex said, obviously not quite believing him. What's brought on this personality switch, then? Why does it have to be about a girl? 2 years is a long time, Remus said, annoyed. It's not like I've suddenly changed. Look, I first said I'd help Dumbledore fight when I was 14, he tried to explain. Then last year, James Potter told us all that he planned to join as soon as he left school, and we all said we would go too, and I was always going to, you know, but just because James and Sirius wanted to. I never had a reason myself, really. We're all going to suffer if you know who wins, Ferrex said. Yeah, I suppose, Remus nodded, diplomatically. I know that, but I meant, well, I never really had much of a stake in it before. Now I've met Livia, I don't think anything's going to be great for me after school finishes, no matter who's in power. I want a stake if I live. You shouldn't compare yourself to them, Remus. The pack. Can't really help it, can I? Everybody else will. You know my friend, Sirius Black? Not well, Ferrex replied. The Potters took them in, didn't they? I thought it was a bit odd, knowing his family. Exactly, Remus said, triumphantly. Sirius is my best friend, and a Gryffindor, and the Potters love him. But to everyone else, he's still a Black. He'll spend the rest of his life trying not to be, no matter how many good things he does, because people never forget things like that. They think that what you are makes you who you are. It's the same for me. Remus was struggling now to keep explaining. Ferrex looked completely lost. He sighed heavily. I'm sorry it has to go through you. You're the only person I know who has any weight with Dumbledore who I trust. Who trusts me. Ferrex watched him again, with a steady expression. I will try, Remus. You're asking a lot. Remus frowned. He thought about Livia, her bare feet, her ragged clothes, a terrible cough and the hollow look in her eyes. It was no way to live. You might be asking for a lot, but Remus had never asked for anything before in his life. He hoped Dumbledore remembered that.